Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland with Jimmy. We're covering pages 38 and 39 in our analysis of Chapter 3, A Caucus Race and a Long Tail. So we left off with the mouse telling a very dry story. He was trying to tell the driest story he knew in order to dry the people, not people, Alice and the creatures that were in the pool of tears. And then the group having a caucus race and the dodo calling out, they decided to have a caucus race because the mouse talking in the driest thing about William the Conqueror wasn't working. So they had a race. And don't forget the rules of the race, which we'll review in a minute. And then suddenly the dodo called out, "The race is over." And they crowded around the dodo, panting and asking, "But who has won? But who has won?" This question bothered the dodo, if you read in this paragraph right here, and he couldn't answer it without a great deal of thought. So the dodo stood for a long time with one finger pressed on its forehead, and he refers to Shakespeare. See the parentheses again? The parentheses is a beautiful way of telling us that the third person narrator is talking to us, leaving the story for a moment, and just adding a little texture to what's being said about the story as the storyline moves along. In this case, the parentheses, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him. Now, if you don't know who Shakespeare is, you better look him up because Shakespeare is a great playwright, English playwright, very important person in literature. And in the pictures that you see of Shakespeare, sometimes it's pointing, what he's saying is that it's a gesture pointing to its forehead. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, you're going to have to judge for yourself sometimes, right? I'm not going to tell you what is or isn't true, because like you, I'm in Wonderland. But the rest of the creatures waited in silence. But finally, the dodo said, "Everybody," see the italicized? Everybody has won, and all must have prizes. That's an interesting concept. Everybody wins. Don't forget, knowledge's comparison is one of the concepts that we follow throughout this book. You need one thing to know what another thing is. And now the dodo's telling us everybody has won, and all must have prizes when asked the question who has won. But you can't know what winning is unless you know what losing is, right? You just can't. It's impossible. You won't know. A chorus of voices then says, "Well, who's going to give the prizes?" Now, notice we haven't even talked that the race has prizes, that you win something if you win the race. Nothing of that has been discussed. What? "She, of course," said the dodo, pointing at Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in a confused way, "Prizes, prizes, prizes, prizes." Like mob action. Alice has no idea what's going on, and she's in despair. Let me mark that word, despair. And in despair. Do you know what despair is? When you despair, you lose all hope. So Alice has lost all, they're crowding around her now looking for these prizes, and she's lost all hope. Puts her hand in her pocket and then pulls out comfits. What's a comfit? I looked it up for you. It's on the left here. It's preserved fruit, meat, or veggies. It's preserved, which means that it's been preserved. You can eat it. It's hard candy, right? Or hard veggies or whatever, which she has. The salt water didn't get into it. I don't know how that happened. Remember, the parentheses is the third person narrator telling us, luckily, the salt water hadn't gotten into it. He's indicating to us that these comfits are still okay. And so Alice hands them out. They were exactly one piece all around. We still don't know how many people are here or how many creatures are here, but she has enough to go around. "But she must have a prize herself," said the mouse. "What about Alice?" The dodo very gravely. The dodo's kind of pompous. Look up the word pompous, but he says gravely. Of course, the dodo replied. What else have you got in your pocket? Alice goes, a thimble. And she said, all I got is a thimble. Give it or hand it over here, says the dodo. So they crowd around her once more while the dodo solemnly, very, very solemnly, presented the thimble, saying, we beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble. Remember, the dodo's kind of like pompous, stuck up, right? So he talks like that. We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble. And when it had finished this short speech, they all cheered. All the creatures are happy. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd. absurd. I defined it for you on the side here. It's wildly unreasonable and illogical. Now, I want you to jump down to the note down here. Isn't this whole story absurd? Or is it? Think about that for a while and ask yourself, what is absurd? It's illogical. It's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to think that Alice had exactly the amount of comforts for the creatures around her. It's unreasonable to think that these creatures talk. It's totally illogical, but yet it's happening, according to the third person narrator. So she thinks it's absurd, but they looked at her so grave that she didn't dare laugh. She didn't want to laugh because they're looking at her very seriously. She couldn't think of anything to say. She simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. Now remember, she gave the dodo the thimble, and he's giving it back to her, and she bows in acceptance of the thimble. So what do we have here? We have Alice falling again into the world that she's in. She's starting to get used to it. She questions it at first. She cries a little bit. She gets in despair, but she's starting to play along with whatever's happening to her. This play along, I should type that out for you. Let me write that down. Go along, or play along. Okay, go along or play along. If you go along with something that's going on around you, maybe you're involved, maybe you're not involved. We're going to talk about that later on in this book. But the next thing to do was to eat the comfits, and this caused quite noise and confusion. So now all the creatures are going to eat them because the large birds said they couldn't taste theirs. And the small ones started choking and had to be patted on the back. So you have these comfits being eaten by the creatures, and if they're big, it's too small to taste, and they've got the small ones choking on it. But when it was over, they actually begged the mouse to tell them something more. So they're asking the mouse, please tell us something more, because they're all dried off now, they're ready. And by the way, one of the things that occurred to me in the prior 2 pages while they were before they started the caucus race is that probably only the mouse and Alice had to dry themselves off, because these birds, as I mentioned, most of the birds have feathers that actually shed the water. In any case, they want the mouse now to tell them some stories, right? You promised to tell me your history, said Alice. Even Alice is getting into the game, like I said. And why it is you hate C and D. Does anyone know what C and D is? And why does it, if Alice knows, obviously she's using those letters to mean something. She knows what they mean. You probably can guess what they mean, because she's saying that the mouse hates C and D, but she doesn't spell them out. She added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again. It. Remember pronouns? We're going to talk a lot about pronouns. It. Okay, so C and D are obviously cats and dogs, and she doesn't say, she whispers to the mouse. because she doesn't want to offend the mouse or get him quivering. And then he says, mine is a long and sad tale, turning to Alice and sighing. Mine is a long and sad tale. It is long tale. It is a long tale, certainly, said Alice, down with wonder at the mouse's tail. She's looking at the mouse's tail with wonder. It's so long. Why do you call it sad? Why do you call it the tail sad? And she kept puzzling about it while the mouse. We're going to stop there. Before we go on, I want you to look at tail and tail. Word choice, word usage, words meaning are very important communications. The mouse says that he basically, mine is a long and sad tale. Now, he's referring to the story that everybody wants to hear the mouse say, but Alice looks at his tail, which is quite long, and says, it is a long tail, but why do you call it sad? It. What is it? It. In this case, it is the tail. Is it the T-A-I-L or is it the T-A-L-E? We're going to have to continue to figure that out. What I want you to know now before we go is that you're going to experience a story in a story, which is a new concept. The mouse is now going to tell a story. He's in the story. And unlike the story that was William the Conqueror, he was trying to tell him something to dry them off. This is going to be a story inside a story. It's a very good concept in literature, and it's used many, many times in different books. So it's a story in a story, and we're going to get wrapped up in the mouse's story for a while, and then we're going to come out of it again back into Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. My email address is Jimmy, right, at Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Send me an email, drop me an email. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.